Dhammo Jondene Dijin Shima Rajam Yandaba Zube Sanje Reba Dan Shosu Dhammo Dewa Shiva Juden Jam Chubu Deve Kalo Jawa Lana Meba Lado Menanje Dhammo Sanje Jonden Bejawa Jaja Doba La Shanze Chudo Joso Jewo Dhammo Jondene Dijin Shimo Rajam Yandaba Zube Sanje Reba Dan Shosu Dhammo Dewa Shiva Juden Jam Jabo Dere Kalo Jawa Lana Deba Lado Menon Deba Sanje Jande De Bejawa Jaja Doba La Sanje Chodo Joso Jewo Deba Jande De Dijin Rajamba Yandaba Zobe Sanje Riba No Joso Deba Dewa Shema Jiten Chenpa Chupo Deve Kalo Jo Lana Men Lado Men Nanje Dhamma Sanje Jante Bejawa Jaja Tuba Na Shanze Chodo Joso Jao Dhamma Jante De Dejen Shiva Rajam Yandaba Zobe Sanje Riba Na Joso Dhamma Dewa Shiva Juden Jabo Dere Kalo Jawa Lana Meba Lada Mena Jedam Sanje Jande De Bejawa Jaja Doba La Shansen Chedo Jazo Jeo Kanze Kanyen Zuwa Jedanje Sajen Dena Gomba Dembo Mane Juden Dena Jote Son De Zekeba Jela Shansen Nanda Gama Chodo Zodawa Yishe Janzo Suje Nembo Tabo Juden Sona Langewa Gombo Chunye Chola Janzen Senjo Denpa Zhumian Da Ye Sendo Zhawa Chola Janzen Dere Jinda Siba Suma Je Nyame Chenje Chola Janzen Gombo Toje Chedenba Dangche Chenbe Tenba Sana Yuden Jangdo Ye Dejen Shila Jangzen Tabe De Chan Je Wan Je Gebe Son Nedru Jido De Dang Cho Je Ba Xin Je Chela Jangzen Zhe Nian Zhu Yue Lang Yang Den La Ba Da La Zhao Den Xian Ge Dang Ba Yin Den Den Gen De Lang Yang Xiang Zhen De Ba Jian Yang Men Jia Xin Ge Wa Bi Song Zhou Ba Rang Ge Sen Ne Yong Su De De Ne Sang Je Den Ba Kama Ra De Ma Me Dong Ju Ma Se Hua Chu Bu Me Lang Lu Da Zhen Da Bu Du Xie Chu Nang De Da Sa Nang De Yue Tang Ji Zi Ba Yin Gu Hong Da Nian Quan Ji Zha De Ga Dang Na Dang Qi Wei Lao Zhu Si Wei So Len Zhou Wan Zhou Wan Zhou Ba Ba Gun Liu Song Lan Xiang Zi Nuan Du Ge Da Ge Du Ba Di Jian Jiang Dian Dian Jie Bi Kao Xia Ge Peng Bi Le La Gen Long Ge Gen Di Qian Bo Xiang Chu Sen Bi Gen Di Qian Bo Dang Tao Ji Du Zhu Dian De Ye Zhen Jiang Dian De San Mo Nang Wa Xie Xia Yun Qi Ji Nang Zhang 定业真郎将把修所养，地狱财上求三宝真宝真宝，宝宝心里在往修谢他之法罗多心，三面九宝尼拉能宝大仙，波波阿波的大郎呀。 上仙就东巴南巴到我天天上街就推才当电波，下里波上就三波跑跑新人，我说了的给这么说的就不看了，写到就把这都行，上面写吧写吧，对吧的就打了吧下。地给这门宝当上主三八全部宝宝新人，我就给财当电宝下了到地宝了，地给这门下的宝这就帮忙刚了写到这把路都行，上面学吧写吧，这把电的大能把大我家。风波昂波跌打江上仙就东巴能，杨道波就是道我苏东巴我东巴年苏苏来东巴年先马燕东巴年来江苏先马燕。天仙都错我当地些当能把是我能东巴。下里波跌打去当街东巴年的财年命。马切巴巴这马面巴这马当这瓦面巴刚瓦面巴我下里巴得大爷那。东巴尼拉祖门，娑瓦面地些面地些面，南巴西巴面面南瓦面，他面界面绿面一面祖面这面若面这家面去面多面给康面巴，一句康面一句南巴西面康就巴多样面多。玛利巴面，玛利巴塞巴面巴呢，个些面个些是面巴多样面，天仙多东安瓦当，金钟瓦当，古巴当，拉面一些面些，头巴面马头巴样面多，下里巴得大人，上九人巴南头巴面比谢了就巴罗。先把那点点点点，三那九把面面找把面，七斤落来心多点点，两眼来的别大，心多丢送多，能把就三节堂节讲些了就跑着多，先把那点点那那面。杨道宝左边上九多，我把左把上街，跌到月那写到就跑着都新边行，这把前边行，老那面边行，门娘把到娘边行，东眼堂街绕都西话西边行，面这边那电把写把下的写到就跑着都新。阿弥巴提亚汤嘎đề嘎đề巴拉嘎đề巴拉桑嘎đề波提耶娑，夏利波上就三巴千波提达谢拉吉巴罗多吉，萨摩拉拉巴夏乌天天将的的天眼在天连人，上就三巴千波波波心连在往修拉连梭。谢谢我新年来说，这就不天天见弄这就，天天见的就到就点把见多，谢到就跑出多行，萨摩老西巴小点的见，西巴能将就是一张，将的就的给就刚在当点把下当的地不。上九三八金宝宝新的在往修当街当的，国대다当拉当面当那么也当这咋的，一点一让的讲的，松巴拉公巴的多，那么多公巴就在家边养老小子。大给罗这真年真年大能大着是，今年的根基现在是年节多个联邦，帮到随便自然马的民东东年就是。 多做跟了不接大自然拉住这样的，多到接着年末年龙别着家着主子，马日没事东年牛过今年正在人中，两年到今三季到这云天六座九三多月。就着就当今年今天当人民要别养老的阿拉巴扎那的阿拉巴扎那的阿拉巴扎那的这点就千绕月在见。大略的莫名把照三年，高当的这雄罗多玛耶，罗着不变能，热多有来节不言之，求一切也没有多。昼夜日夜如夜流一节，牛羊丢也牛羊不也丢，松也久也少也多，妙也丢也没有我也。多一个呀，多呀，多一些啦，就要不有就怎样么？多呀，多呀，就呀，多。就呀就呀go呀go呀咯，就呀就呀就呀就呀呢，就呀多呀错呀别，就呀就呀就呀么咯。佛言就业就业就业就我，哦呀多呀多呀当古着面真老干那样大呀也妙呀，八天杂云老马真不见，老月是边的的牛郎。高真千遍过年节中的，我从土地木中走多走，边走给那些人准备过，八月六月这我公月送。马列西家之间随便多，小姐做我的那做我的，多久前波的些多久长，就在电脑把当那着吧，边中边把当阿爹上，娘的西老姐老说我的。上报同面一年能着的，昨天对面的当着边边，现在各三六年所联网，牙签是别就能说我的，牙牙有面兄弟乐着当，大王这把这边过着见。三界公众宝宝要塞所，三摩大愿解能所瓦殿，西卓当别中阿阿殿上，高当殿边面波中等见，念觉能学故切松拉所，高当阿拉玛能拉所瓦殿。刚见心的自见总阿公，我都是别往修结藏见， Dāngā tēnbē dābō kē rōjē, yāsē jē bā jē lā sō wā dē, yāsō gō dē lā mā dō jē chāng, ālā gāng dē shēnyē tsū sō dē, chō dāng tē mō ngō chō tsū dē bē, chē jē lā mā nā lā sō wā dē, Raja Sura Gela Daye Min Geza Taba Jebe Jungwa Jung Seve Jebe Dake Zebaye Sanze Shenye Nangla Sowa De Jewa Gurdo Yanda Lama Dan Jeme Chuje Bela Long Shije Sadan lonje yede razone, doje change gobo, nyado jo sanje chu, doje chona la chanchu bodo dane chaso, dāgye chūchī jebē sōnāngye, dōlā pēshē sāngye rūmō shū sāngye, chēdāng sōjē chōnā lā shāngchū bōdō dāne chōsō, dāgye chūchī jebē sōnāngye, dōlā pēshē sāngye rūmō shū sāngye, Chödan suje chona la jancho modo dane chazo. Dage cheche jebe zona je. Dala pense sanje drobo yo. Te piche te tanga tse tenye da, tanga tse ki che. Chöna tse yonge la ma tebe nge che she che che chi nge ne. Gen ye keju ki tebe kyunat che we nge. Rangi ma chushi bikala pe lhatam la kasa lhatam la medama chi yombo de jajin la so de kanshe da je kan tu tu chile mi ba chene shege
As we all are, receiving the teachings from my side, I always try to give the teachings on the basis of cultivation of right motivations, which is to benefit not only, if possible, our teachings should benefit all other beings, not only human beings, but devas and asuras and so on and so forth. But if that is not possible, at least those who are being here at this time to listen to the teachings, and I have a sincere motivation to benefit.
na de chi de de kala ma tun du sia chushi bikala nge de ring al chi lo chi ra so se gi de chi ko yin da che che so kabo yin ra ta lo ne ne na ya je tong sang yin de kabo re yin na ya ta ma zu chu che ba de ji rang xin sen je tang je la pen ba chi ni je da ba yu she da ne ta ma de ya rang ni le chi pen na ha sang bi ji gen lo chi ne ba de go da ji ro ma do ta ga cha chen so de chi chen da na nen che na to chi chen be mo na ro yin da cha chi be ka la rich me jawa che tujing drage chachen de me na ni so so no no ba le le de den samba de le ma pa ani ta ne kare che go re se che ro ma tan da ten ge ki ji be ba yin la ma yin sing de ji la ni ngan de chu se ji ni de se to la kare che go re se so so lo pa ka tu be go lo ze ge su ni ta ke chen dong de ji xie ne de ji de se to la dong ni ji ma se xie de de mo da so de ji ji chon cha so yin na 네, 딱 그처럼 고양이 넘버 9도 추기 받자는 좀 거부지더라.
So listening to the teachings of the Dharma and giving the teachings of the Dharma should have this motivations of benefiting not only oneself, but all other sentient beings. For us, if that is not possible, that we may not be able to have such a, extensive and vast motivations of benefiting other beings, well, one should at least have a pure motivations or the genuine motivations of helping oneself or benefiting oneself, meaning that as a result of receiving one's teaching, one should have this motivations of transforming one's state of mind and one's way of thinking. And because if one is unable to have these motivations and correct motivations or appropriate motivations of receiving the teachings, and then we're spending a couple of hours every week, may become useless. In other words, it's a waste of time. And also, nowadays the weather is quite hot, and we're taking our time and sacrificing and being in this heat and sitting on a one place for a couple of hours will become worthless. So therefore, if one is able to have appropriate motivation that is required for one to have when one is receiving the teachings of the Dharma, then one's time and effort and energies and sacrifices all becomes meaningful and worthwhile. So therefore, when receiving the teachings, we should always have this motivations, if possible, to motivation benefiting all other things. If it's not possible, it is at least to benefit one's own self, which is to say, the transformation of one's mind.
당가 속에 단지 생 고용하게 넘버 전에 당가 속에 협이 가 속에 개개 세나리 덤버 세나리 네 로담버 세에 덤버 투비 홍보 안래 정말 너니 동가 장면라 니 초게 저기 넘버 때네 로마기리라 니 치주 콜로 코샤에 되게 니 진도지 다는 것도 지게 이신이 지네 티네 니다 데린 거스 바보가 좀 데리지야 견자바다 되게 치주 진도 협이 거스 바 인자네 아니 who know yen temba to be the rang de ni no ba de ni la ani de ko la yen che so be no ba de la yes.
So now we are receiving, as usual, as a prior to receiving one's teachings. Let's take a couple of minutes to visualize Buddha Shakyamuni along with all other great teachers, the Buddha Shakyamuni who came to this world as 2,500 years ago. And then there were many other masters who followed his footsteps and receiving the teachings and giving the teachings to their disciples. All those lineage gurus are present in the space in before oneself.
네, temba de yen de la ma jubege anga suge tanda tanya ngose de ni shinda chimba namba ni se de na temba gumba temba ko nyang le de lo ji ja je la ma se phe ma de ti paru gi jin da ge ya chi ni shang chu samba da ni ja ko tan de yang jin jin de ni shang chu samba zhang me ba ye si ge ye gu ra ye si ji ma ni za da ma suge de ngose da shinda chimba ni yin ngon je ja yi nang go lu lu lo ji ja ge je shen de ro 간제 던지기 채우면도 간제 달루도 토면에 zon데 네 소수 천정만 되지 라미 바데 네 된전 나가 되니라 아니 차는 쇼여 한다고 되지 내가 지체.
So then think about all those lineage gurus, particularly the lineage gurus, the primary lineage gurus, in other words, we would say Nagarjuna and Asanga, who are in the presence in the space surrounding Buddha Shakyamuni, and try to visualize as vivid as possible.
네 나온다 라냐이 아니 지 맞아 대화 되지 동해 만들어 인자디 선제 강가기 미지바 대화 집안도 지래 인자디 아니 지 소대세마 다수 제임에라마 되베게 지 선제가 처음에 뭐 못하면 쉬위지디니 네 randā rāñā ki dī, tā rāndā ñāmbē ki nī, kōlā dī kāna sēnā rī, tā pā mī pā chēnā chē mē shēngi chē rō, nā kī tā tā ñāmbē sā lā kī rō. Tēn rī kī sēn chē yō sō dō bā tē nī, tēn tā tsō chī shēng tē tā kī dē lā, nī ngā tā tā bī chē kī rō, nī chē kī yō sā nī, nī kōnchō lā yā tē bā tē nī, nī sēn chē lā mē bē nī chē chē nā, kā mā chī sī chī, nī bā chā shā bī tēn tā sēnā rī, tsō sā bī tēn tā, mī bā chā kī chē kī tā.
In their presence, oneself is in their presence, and oneself is also surrounded by all those sentient beings without exceptions. who has a similar wish to achieve happiness and overcome sufferings. In other words, the same objective, the common objective that we have with all other sentient beings to achieve happiness and overcome sufferings. And imagine as vast, countless sentient beings as possible, as in other words, as equal to the space of all sentient beings. And all of them are having a genuine motivations of engaging and receiving these teachings of the Dharma, and have a faith towards object of refuge that has been visualized, and compassion towards all other sentient beings. With these two, one then take keeping these two in one's mind, and take a couple of minutes to remain.
야, 아끼는 쳐봤지, 네 강스 바셔 예체네. 아니 제유송으로 괜히 힘보 디바세네. 제유송으로 연수 조바게 된 디비. 아니 상처는 전이 마스. 송으로 괜히 힘보 딘데와 신데天热 된다니 배장 당치체다 특별 변소세네. 이제는 코로나에서 와라. 인자는데 치天气랑 같은 데라고 지天气다. 아니 지녀다 바에 근데 지정소는 아니 상제게 담비치 연수 조바. 아니 天气年보다 天气 상나도 바게 변해서 와라.
With these motivations, one is then receiving the teachings, creativities on the stages of the path, enlightenment, which is the encapsulation of entire teachings of the Buddha. In other words, this creativities on the stages of the path, enlightenment, is the container which contains all the teachings of the Buddha. So it is for this Lama Tsongkhapa is mentioned in his, right from the beginning of his text of the abbreviated Lam Rim, the short version of Lam Rim, where he stated as a as a concise collection of all the teachings, and one session of either teachings or the listening to this system accumulates the same benefits as explaining, hearing all the dharmas.
나야 저게 편집하게 쳐도 담보와 담보 투비 홍보네 랑게 전제 사이라면 받아 세요디 네 남아테다 대 구성 투지에 대 가려요 선언지 따나 제법이 쳐와대 독스.
So then if one is able to reflect one's mind upon the qualities of all those great beings, the finished gurus or the teachers, their qualities of their spiritual realizations, their qualities of the wisdom and their compassion, with such reflections will then become will be following the first outlines of the greatness of the teachers given in order to show the teachers has the teachings have noble souls.
되지. 아니 쉬어 상추게 산다. 이제 네 년중 다와 땡중 네 상무 동반이 이제 되는 법이 아니 된조 차라게 넘버 지대 아니 되게 제셔제래 송에나 네 좀되게 아니 가서 네 당말 기바지 취지 치와도 보러
Then if one is able to reflect one's mind upon the teachings such as uh, bodhicitta, uh, renunciations, perfect view of emptiness, and teachings on the dependent originations, with such reflections, is with these reflections, one is actually reflecting on the second outlines, showing the greatness of the teachings in order to engender respect for the teachings.
다 라니 베나 진르게 냐슬링이 강사 베나로와 또 쉬어버티 냐슬링이 강사 가르치는 차고 그래 아니 또 된중선에 된주 차라데 냐슬링이 가르치는 차고 그래서는 은행이 고아질링이나 아니 녀시 지다 샤워세데 세다 세레 게로라다 맞게 뭐 상일에 데로라 되게 과라바지레는 소소 소아지
Yeah,
때도나
by knowing those qualities of the qualities, the spiritual qualities of the authors, and the actual teachings of the authors, that is teachings, actual teachings that is given by those great teachers. Then next is to, in what way that one can, receive these teachings and practice, and how do we practice, and in what way that I can practice following the practice of dependent originations, both subtle and the gross level of dependent originations, an understanding of subtle and subtlety of dependent originations. With this, with this reflection will enable us to reflect oneself on how to listen to the teachings in which both the teacher, both the teachings and then its authors are great.
nga tsoge sosogi nga tsoge pa yenda chile chwa tona sere soso dindrige nga ne tashenye de nyangsengi kansa che na sosogi di kansa de kante chi tsenzi che to gore rwa jacha kasi tsi che to gore nga ne bas tse pechi lau me shingi de chirwa dindrige nyangsengi yi kansa nga ne tsama tsangja chi yoro che wa yina tene da nga ne nobu rang rwa.
How wonderful it is if someone who is really wholeheartedly following these teachings, unmistakably, how wonderful it would be. May I be able to do this, and this should be this kind of motivations must be present when one is receiving these teachings.
nga zo sanje yi gopang san shu la ne bete ye de na ba to san shu ji jang de ma to nga denye nyangsengi ki chela chi tuye de rwa.
So when we speak about, achievement of enlightenment by receiving all these teachings, but whether or not one will be able to, one is being able to embarking on the path that leads oneself to the state of enlightenment is whether or not one is following the teachings of the true truths.
Dendriki rangi dendriki chela tsuba la karu gore sala suna ngone am tombo de tsedan de bi gi shenyi chi de che go la de sebu se jang ro lang lo ba tengen che sona di shuo go ro ma ro.
In order for one to become a these practitioners or the real practitioners or the unmistaken practitioners, what is required then is to require a teacher who teaches, or a qualified teacher who teaches the teachings unmistakably.
야, 되게 랑지 자와 신이 되면 때는 로 제다 셔 이런 것에 되니 dendriki tseda de bi gi shenyi de 아니 간지치 때서는 디 이제라 아니 다 nga chong yin na xiu jie ne nyang le rang ge shi xian ge yin na ni zuo sa zhe xiang ni xiong le lo xiong ni gang jia de zhe ge song zhe to neng zhuo song yin na ni ren bo mo to ne de zhe ge xie da de bi gang sa mo ne ro ni jie se sing de jie se sing de ro la.
But then, if one is really able to follow those teachings, as it is followed by the great teachers of the past, then one will then become what we call the children of the child of a or children of the victories or the Buddhas.
야, 당연히 좀 로바. 다 때는 대이 되는 니볼린 비시 그거도 니보 제단린 비치니. 다 도문지 니보 제단린 비치라니 란지 나자라 니바 제세다 니볼린 증거 도문지 니볼린 증거로 송 주부 중문의 도모 란지를 만났는데 주변전은 주부 천변 란지를 만났는데 제지 도모 니인지 다 주부 천변 란지를 만났는데 제가 송 대칭 란지 보고 세제 하나 된거 센데 제다 주부 센제는 쇼발로 제지 도문지 센제는 쇼발로 제라 송 센제는 로발로 비제세 다시 레레와로로 상제면 주가 된바 호발로베 림바니 시바지 다 동반인지 나 호발로베 림바니 시바니 쇼바절 티바첨바 절라도 치바도 도제 티바라 제제 동볼로송 상세연나 바론데 정화 장내 제세 제담바송 존에 제달림 비추지 동반지 다 존에 제달림 비추라니 강라라 비제 텔라바 텔라 제달라베 림바지 다 동반인지 다 텔라 제달라베 림바라니 쇼바절라도 제도 치바도 파세 타만일라 제제 동반지 다 파세 타만일라 로질라 주 신내도 하동제 편연시바 대니 딩엔제 경제 디제 되고 신내 하동제 뭐 대니가 강비 그비 진세 고랭에 거 소설로 제제 다 도망간지 다 소설로 질라니 신내 로질 하동로 제제 동반지 다 하동로 질레시 하동제 초대바 하동제 라도요 라도 강비세 강비 하동도 제제 동벌라송 장대당 승예대 소령으로서 루주주 군반들이 제다죠 도만이제 다와대라 배바지 도만이 다와대발라 니 대권한이는 주거래 바 대권한이 대라 배바 뭐지 도만이 대권한이 대라 배바니 가서 응어종하다 대가바다 타랑가게 루시바 시바텔라 되는 다와질라 지거래 바세네 맞아기 네 도만이제 다와대라 배빈 오늘 로직이 돈의 시인데 좋다모 제생이 지죠 대노게 좋다 타마들 오마바생이다 오마 타져와다 라지바생이게 근데 땡저 참못 때는 좋지 봐네 좋다모 니좀 말해서 애니긴도 시카라래서 니꺼서 보방가도 되지래도
Currently, we are on the chapter where it establish the emptiness, the viewpoint of emptiness. So when it comes to the viewpoints of emptiness, there are various emptiness of the selflessness. There are various viewpoints, such as the viewpoints of the four philosophical schools, viewpoints of emptiness on four philosophical schools. And at this point, we are on the establishment of the viewpoint emptiness, the viewpoint of emptiness of the Madhyamaka Prasangika, and Madhyamaka Swatantika.
아야 다 되게 이거는 무슨 가르르잖아 엄마 탄저와지 엄마 라지바지라파 아니 추천지 변의 주지지 대마메데 텐텐에 비슷해서 다르 거비 온도도나 아니 엄마 탄저와다 라지바 인가들 뭐네기 추천 주데 뭐네 인가라 테모기 아니 세메트고지 시가 말해서
이제 루미제 간수만 연계수는 거야.
다 엄마가 저기 단단하니 거서 그러잖아
그렇지.
엄마 탄저와지 엄마 라지바지라 아니 데 단다 데마 랑시제마도 주치제 덴바마도 데 베나 텐텐에 비슷 러비 거서 아니 엄마 탄저와도 엄마 라지바 인가기 아니 지바지장기 주 세메트고지 시가 말해서
So, for instance, now there are comparing this standpoint of emptiness between comparison between Madhyamaka Prasangika and Madhyamaka Swatantikas. As for instance, if Madhyamaka Prasangika states this syllogistic reasonings, the reasons of syllogism by saying that form has no ultimate existence because they are dependently originated, they are dependently arising. And when such syllogism is stated towards Madhyamaka Swatantika, then the very subject itself which is the form. Its very existence of the form itself differs, in the standpoint of existence of the form itself, it differs between those two philosophical tenets.
Jitsen karasana, uma ranchi pa singe de zu rangshin chupa khenle ba chi. Ene zunzi mishi de machupa re la war. Uma thanji wa singe de zu rangshin je machupa khenle zunzi mishi de chushi re la war.
Because
Nenga tusa.
why these two are not seeing eye to eye on the actual existence of the form is because the Madhyamakas Swatantika, sorry, Madhyamaka Swatantika, asserts that form is intrinsically existence, whereas Madhyamaka Prasankhika, form is lack of intrinsic existence. It is thus both of their view on actual mode of existence of the form is not a comparable. Both of them, the way their understanding of actual mode of existence of the form itself is differs.
Yeah. Eche di kola nga so ye nang hama se che mar ka che jibi ye cheba che we kola jichi gi te jichi de denji jin na je le ja ne. Ti de ne den de chara ge ro tang. Ni zo ba de se yin wo.
So this is now, bringing the subject as a form in these two philosophical tenets. And based on this subject matter, so this subject, which is form, based on this form, they are having a debate. In other words, they're having a debate about the form that is being a subject.
Tele nga ni ma tha rin ro so na be de ji zu gi tin de la me ye zhu ta ma wa ye ye jen je gi tin de ne so de to be ta san je tin de pa le ji ji gi tin de ta wa tin la pe ne yo go re ma to ji de ne zhe da to ro ne che ge ke che ma re.
So both of those are actually trying to establish within the form itself the subtleties of dependent originations and the subtleties of cause and effect.
Tētī ngā tsū tō bā chā sā rō, tē ngā tāng chā kī, tō ngā tsū zū tōmbā wō, tōmbā nī zū lē, tōmbā nī lē chā zū shē mā yī nō sē yu, tē kā lā, zū khurō kī tēn tē, umī tāwa, tā tū umī tāwa tē zū khurō gāng lā. Nī, umī tāwa nī bē lō tē nī kī, zū kī mī tē tē, zū kī tēn tē shē rō yā chē chī mā tō, yāng chī kār sā, hī mā tsū bā tsā sā yī shē lē shēn chī, yāng lē yuān chī rē mā tō wā.
So therefore, when we look at this, the Madhyamaka Prasankhika standpoint, by trying to step, the way they establish is both conventional and ultimate within one locus, within one subject, such as form, that we all are familiar with in this Heart Sutra, where it says, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, and form is not other than emptiness, and emptiness other than form. That really indicates that it's actually, within this one locus of being as form, that's it's establishing both ultimate and conventionality.
Tā ngā nī kāsi sāngsāng rōgī dā, tī gāng yī ngā tsui sē kī tsui dā kāsi tāng dā sōng zā rī. Tā zhōng tē tā zhā nī xē nā āsī, pē chē tēng yī rō kāsi ngā. Zhōng tē tā zhā nī xē nā āsī, gāng kī tsē xē bā nī, kē lāng bā nī dō xī bī bē nī sōng dō. Rū xī chū tē tēng chū jīn, mī gāng zū lā sō bā tē nī tē khuā nā nī nyāng bā jō wā tē, mā rū bā lē tēng jī dē rā nī jī kē lāng bā yī nō. 최전 전다시 냐나 마리벨리비 시진 로상제 다기 공부니 바테 미게 셰발라 소베 타니비 셰바 상제 주비 되노 켈랑루네 소도.
So now let's read from the book. It's 255. It's the last paragraph. Now let me explain this by tying my analysis to the Chandrakirti's text, the meaning of passage, so far as one accepts the refutation of the production himself, must accept that it is so, is as follows. This basis of the probandum as subjects such as I or the form breaks down. That is not not established in reality. This is something that Baba Vivu himself accepts.
Yeah, Lobe Lede just said Umar Rajiba, Lobe Rajibi to Takeling, Umar Rajiba is Salagra.
So Baba Viveka is the master who follows the Madhyamakas, Swatantikas, philosophical tenets.
Yeah, Talete Kadachi Karalang, Mother Kelly, but the Kelambani Kavade. Jensen here, Kalala Sonse, they call Korogi, Pashu, Jensen, the Shea, we call Mendation, the Pashu, the Kalala Roger, Kalala Sonse, Rani Kelangamare, Jensen, then Kalala Son at the
So this accept and acceptance here. Now, when we search at accepts, and it's this in this particular case that when accepts based on the reasonings, when the reasoning is valid or the reasoning is stated, and the individual who has no other choice but to accept based on reasonings.
Yeah, that country can Taji, then the corner number said the Pena Rashi to Kalas, Rashi Majuba Kalan, so with that one. So the country says on the number Joka, but there's a Chuchen Tedala, Duji choose them, but they says he should their corner Druna, Tempa Gay Shero, Wana Soda, Benandero Amazon, Tendre Kalian Sona, Rashi to say the Kalian Tugumare. Tenjingone, Tende Trubachi Kalian Sona, Rashi Majuba the Czech Kalan Sondes and Lachovers. Kemalin and get over the Kaje.
So what are those subjects? I and a form, like something found to have in own existence by inaccurate consciousness, affected by ignorance. This means that the conventional consciousness, such as the visual consciousness, establish this object. How it is, the Bhavaviveka himself must accept this. He must accept this, accept it insofar as because the repetition of the ultimate production as the predicates of the probandum is based upon those subjects. If they did not exist, if they did exist in reality, it would be contradict the relationship between subject and predicates.
Maya, the Konani the Majuba, the Konani the Trubasi the Rashi to Rana Jaburata, because the Shita and the low Aya Santon Ayamato. Tanga to yin sha the Russia, the Konani the Drona Rashi to killing. As a Rashi, Moatuna, and then Tetuba Jitanjela Teban Gese the Roa. No, the Konani the two, Moni to go as an, and this is that your Karachin Tegore. Is it then? I can't any killing on the Chabra.
So here, sometimes when we see that's ultimate existence, sometimes we see that we may find the term that's called lack of intrinsic existence. Sometimes we might see the term called of emptiness and selflessness and so forth. So all of them, when it comes to the mathematical Prasangika standpoint, they are all synonymous.
Wanasa, Teta Kelly, De Jinjananas, De Kona Majujin, De Kona Niji Danyang, Mayin Bizula Soba Tane, Machubi Shibini Bitan de Mironye, Yijin Zimba, Zimba Zimbi, Tani Bi Shibi Niba Yinbe, Deda Jang, Maribi Libi, Chuba Yino, Dena Machubi Nibi Dun, Trishila Manala, Trishila. Now you turn Machubi Sheba Machubi Shibe Neba Maide Shijin Lo Tushedan Shijin Malo be Machubi Sheba Rangi Yi Tad Pensi Bambi Gone Yulan Jubi Tadeba Yimbi Shoro Sheba Ne Soda.
So, granted that he accept things in this way, what does that entails? Those subjects form, etc., that neither exists in reality, nor a reality, nor a reality itself cannot be considered object found by the non-mistaken consciousness. Hence, they are found by the conventional consciousness or the subject that apprehends false object, and thus those consciousnesses are mistaken. That is affected by ignorance. Therefore, subject found by the non-mistaken consciousness do not appear to mistaken consciousness, and subject that appears to the mistaken consciousness are not found by the non-mistaken consciousness. This is because this inaccurate mistaken consciousness and the accurate non-mistaken consciousness are different, which is to say that each engages in the object by excluding the object of others. This is the meaning of the Chandrakirti's statement that inaccurate and accurate consciousness are different.
And so Oma Ranchi Batasaki, Zonzi Mishima Chubares. And Oma Tajo Jana Machuba Shebachi, true Zumba Tongmare, Zumbachi, Demba Tongmares, and any take it and that area. Kajinanga Tusatere.
So this is what is we have mentioned earlier that the way that Madhyamaka Prasantika and Madhyamaka Swatantika accepts actual mode of existence of the form that we talked about earlier, because whereas here now the Madhyamaka Prasantikas accept the form being lack of intrinsic existence, whereas Madhyamaka Swatantika form is intrinsic existence. So the one is lack of intrinsic existence, one is accepting intrinsic existence. And not only that, but also the way the subjective, consciousness, for instance, eye consciousness, eye consciousness, eye consciousness, seeing form, in the Madhyamaka Swatantikas would say it is a non-mistaken consciousness. Whereas Madhyamaka Prasangikas, eye consciousness, seeing form is mistaken consciousness, because for the eye consciousness, this form appears as an intrinsic existence. It is therefore eye consciousness a mistaken consciousness. Madhyamaka Prasangikas standpoint.
Shebane, Shijino, the Shijimaloban, Tadeba Nido, Shesumbi, Dano, Teni Chebane, Kangetse, Shebane, Miba Kala, Ye, Jebi Paro, Tela Shijin Lo Chebane, Mila Subi Sheba, Tanye Ba, Mariba Heba, Naso, Tedagi Yoba Maimba, Yoba Nidan Zin Shebane, Zudala Soba Ranking, Niji Trubi Tseni. Mais gender ambi shepe yoba zon de tome je shepe zon ne na zan la sha go be rang ge chen ni de zu so na o de chen na yoba ju de cha zan la yang mi pa ka lan je shepa ne me ne de da rang se mais gender no yi sha shepa de da ge rang ge chen ni ji yebi den chamoyang juba galan jeshi bi den yino masondo ma den no masondo yiba lo na vidi sa to ani lo shi ba den no rangi tseni je jubi den me ba sheba no yi bene chashela soba ta sheba o so te ba ya sa.
The explanation of that occurs in the passage, therefore, when an inaccurate are non-existent, so insofar as they are merely conventional, that inaccurate refers to the conventional consciousness that is affected by ignorance, such as the visual consciousness, that such visual consciousness, that such consciousness takes that is non-existence as existence, refers to the fact that refers to the fact that while form, sound, etc., have no essential or intrinsic character, the sensory consciousness apprehend them as having such character. The way that non-conceptual consciousness apprehend their object is in terms of mere appearance, and that is why form and such appears to the sensory consciousness to exist by way of their intrinsic character. The words it does not perceive perceives even to the slightest degree, and subject that exists. Even that, because intrinsic character appears despite its non-existence, there's no way for the consciousness to establish even the slightest object that exists by way of its intrinsic character. The falling here is an example of an object that does not exist by way of its intrinsic character. It appears as though it did.
아야, 당연히 고대버려서 엄마 탄저였으나 엄마 탄저에 아니 존재 미시데 추시 가르제네레서나 장시지 마주보다 장시지 주바 존데레스 또메지 셰발의 존생의 강에 받대 농화상을 보고 그래서 대체 엄마 탄저가 이통마임의 세네레 타지 제보고도 당가 좀 뭐에 내지기 봐 다들 저는 봐 정루 샤산데 엄마 탄저에게 네 거사 따도 된 로서나 따 땡들랑 거네 게다뱅이 되래.
So now here, why does the Madhyamaka Prasangika will say that the visual consciousness, or the sensory consciousness are said to be a mystical consciousness, or inaccurate mystical consciousness, is because for the visual consciousness, whatever that appears, in other words, the ordinary visual consciousness, whatever that appears, it appears to them as something that has some sound and etc. have essential or intrinsic character. In reality, such essential character and intrinsic character doesn't exist. The form is; those are not the part of attribute of the form. However, it appears to our visual consciousness. So it is thus Madhyamaka Prasangika accepts our visual consciousness are said to be the mystical and inaccurate consciousness.
아야. 근데 계속 시비가라 엄마 탄저 라지바세도 현다지기 라파제 계시는데 소리지 말이. 딱 가론 쪽에 단다기 변화가 쪽에 렌즈를 식 컨트롤을 존재 메시지 지 참아 통과여서나요. 그 장시지 줘봐 나와. 장시 줘봐 소아인바 차도다. 저딩가 쪽에 메시데 니 자시 미래 가서 자신 장하게 어시 랑차도. 변화 포바 자마 장장 나로라 아니 자지야 매발라 자시 밀런 자식이 나서 인해서는 전체 팀바기 뒤등에 되게 미기 자신 잡아 가르친 통을서나 미코노기 자식이 내버리마도 포박가부까지는 개개요 말어 왔어. 변나 자식 또 따로 세대래. 맞아 라시 주고 로hen체 되게 해병이 수수치 간데 되나요? 라시 주고 송아 나와 제대로 아니 로hen체 되게 해버려. 변나 미 내버기 자식 통만하게 세대래.
So, for us, according to the Madhyamaka Prasangika, whatever that appears to our visual consciousness, they appear to us as if they exist in and of itself. The object that exists in and of itself, or the object that exists intrinsically or essentially, which in reality, they are not. They did not exist in that way, but it appears to us in that way. So therefore, our visual consciousness is sort of are inaccurate and mystical consciousness. So therefore, the Madhyamaka Prasangika has stated, gave the example. He gave the example of that thing, the falling a hair is the example of the object that does not exist by way of intrinsic character. It appears to as though it did. It's because someone due to illness is in for their visual consciousness, they're having some kind of vision of following their hair. If, let's take it, we have a very clear white plate in front of oneself, and we're seeing that such hairs are falling on this plate. In reality, it's nothing is falling, but it is due to their illness, and such, visions may happen to that particular experience, may happen to the particular person.
아야, 다 가서 있잖아요. 가서는 다다 배도 맞추기 시바다 가인 되로. 다 가서 이 시바 찔러다 배 온시기 그 용수 좀한테出现래. 다 또바리지 용수 좀한테라 아니 가르사다 캠바되요로.
So, in other words, now one's own standpoint, which is referring to the Madhyamaka Prasangika standpoints, all those sensory consciousness are said to be the mystical consciousness. And then all those conceptual consciousness are something that has some form of grasping or the clinging onto its object.
아야, 그러면 좀 봐서자.
Let's take a 10 minutes break here.
아야. 진짜 되는 데만 거대거든 너. 거대서 그래. 아야. 시바랑에도 먼저 참모나야 먼저 갈란지고 젠노스 랑게 센니지 주비된 매신의 너희 변에 자실어서 젠노 원点这起 대다게 조저소 너희 온신나 추바인베 대랑게 센니 주제도 미롱아 송소 마치비 시바네 줄라 소방가양 면제도 시비 시바던 바네 관계체를 제 마인베 시에서 tel라 시지 말로바네 네 마치비 시바오 대네 대코나니 무슨데 제발라 예지 젠라 매도 어선도 되시 이거는 아까 오면도다
And this sentence means that the sensory consciousness to which things such as form and sound appears are mystical and are therefore not suited to attest that an object exists by virtue of its intrinsic character. Passage that begins when an accurate consciousness indicates that non-mystical consciousness does not at all apprehend form, sound, and such. The word accurate refers to the non-mystical consciousness. Noble beings who perceive reality possess such consciousness, and no one else. The non-mystical consciousness does not verify what is unreal.
아야, 당가서 세고 차서 마추비 가서 나중에 온실로 용수 줘발을 줘라로 서고 천이 줘봐 나비 진짜스게 네 나중에 미히 온실로 서고 용수 줘고 출시래스 아니 마추지 시바생에 될라 아니 줘라로 서고 나가 말해서데 다 신신세고라 다그 상제 많이 비게 냐자 이시 대다게 줘라로 서고 진이 말해 마도 상제이나 고 냐자래 你解脱呀，应该的哇。
So it's clearly makes a distinction why our ordinary, consciousness is called inaccurate and mistaken consciousness, and the noble beings who perceived the reality, the such consciousness that are accurate and non-mistaken. So now it clearly tells us that only the noble beings whose consciousness are said to be non-mistaken. Other than that, our consciousness, such as ordinary beings' consciousness, are regardless of how accurate that we may consider that our consciousness may be, but they are not actually, in reality, they are not an accurate consciousness. They are a mistaken consciousness.
热力的这玩意呢，这现在我在通过嘛的话是，今天，这呢一个出现变成个就电信，把这的这个帮助玩意呢，你用这个啥，你如让心主办方的，如让主办怎么生意的要嘛的话。
So it is because once you have completely eradicated one's, grasping at intrinsic self or grasping at intrinsic phenomena, then one will not have any consciousness which apprehends something that intrinsically existent or something that essentially existent.
这了世界马路把你老多嘛，这边西巴进了三个人，但这个嘛，这边西巴的了，这可能你我送的接完了，你接完这把了嘛，都现在来要嘛的送到他接。
So it says that the word accurate refers to the non-mistaken consciousness, and noble beings who perceive reality possess such consciousness. It clearly says, and no one else.
但俺说给怕到啊，那了，热气的这产业这些可把弄了，这现在我通过嘛的话，得别等到过去去多。
So it is clear that even if someone who is free of this disease, which enables an individual to have this, image of falling there, here, then such, consciousness will not have that individual who is free of this, free from this disease. Similarly, if when someone who is completely eradicated the grasping at self of person, self of the phenomena, in other words, intrinsically existence of self and phenomena, and such non-mystic, such inaccurate and mistaken consciousness will not happen.
哎呀，我这个别别的这些别下吧的，我们谈就有路了，上星期嘛，主播天灵也得了，你一定的主播地上也没把天灵也得了，你别下是的这些呀，小的是呢，别求的就把我们谈就有到电脑别把了，别的呀，小这些的来说。
One of the example, often the Madhyamaka Prasangikas would give this, that the falling here, an example of an object does not exist by way of intrinsic character, yet it appears as though it did. So this is a very often that example that has been stated by Madhyamaka Prasangikas.
这些个是呢，这些的家，就按现在建议被建议嘛，都一定的这的地上也嘛的话，不可能
Such,
了。
because the such following, having or perceiving or seeing this falling here is something that's not correspond to reality at all. In reality, it doesn't happen. It happens to the person who has someone who is influenced by sickness. So having this kind of image, but in reality, that there's no hair falls. It's happening to that individual. In the same manner, although that our ordinary perception perceives everything that exists intrinsically or essentially, in reality, such intrinsicness and essential existence, it's not exist at all. There's no existence of such things.
密集缺些的这些早上些，然后当 멜롱이 세계 종에 세대 유의 차체 뭔가 수지 대거리 이다 이제 니가 라래들 뭐 보여로 단다데 이제 코너 이제 찍고 있잖아 말도 유의 제제야.
So there are also given many other examples of such as there is one's image that seeing in the mirror of one's image in the mirror, or the mirage, and so on. But out of all those, the hair falls, seeing someone who is having this hair falls, or the image of falling hair is given most effective example, which is why the Madhyamaka Prasangika would always set this as an example of someone who sees the intrinsic existence of all things and event.
都被大藏系的关联的大，落一份下藏的一定了，这一怎么上去也嘛的是别的大。
So this is what is meant by how things exist mere imputed by concepts and term.
树都被大藏的现在树都被大藏的，谁带了嘛都一样，现在这些说的就关注那样，我的看住了。我说树现在把落一批一定可能的呢，连接了边呢，该有的就像那搞不的谁的落一批下藏去了嘛都，我可能我的搞不出个地藏也嘛是，解决我的两个了。
So now, what is meant by something that exists mere imputed by concept and term? For instance, form. When we talk about the form, the very existence of form is mere imputed. The existence of the form is mere imputed by the term and concept. There's no such form that exists by way of its own side. Again, let's talk about the form that is being white form, or the white cup in front of oneself. And that very white cup, that one's very notion of white cup and existence of that particular white cup is mere imputed by one's concept and the term. Other than that, there's no such white cup that exists by its own side.
毕竟莫搞不的门都写了个嘛的大样，莫搞不的内陆建筑比高了，落一下上就是门都那个嘛都，他那边前面别叫个人那当然有了，对面
Well,
样我这个搞得让西去嘛主办呢，他那长的就我们都写的主他我们这个干的继续的了。
yet at the same time, we're not actually rejecting, verifying the actual existence of the form and the white cup. We're not rejecting their existence. What we are rejecting here is we're rejecting the intrinsicness of that object that is being seen by us, such as form and white cup and so forth.
哎呀，等这一过去嘛了，那东北人说的东北人先嘛有生意的，把可能让一些可能给电弄了来，先把这个介绍个嘛了。
So this is what we should understand when we talk about emptiness is form and form is emptiness.
内陆这边高了，现在老的嘛都，他你这边高了，门都老说那养生弄多了。
So the reason why we're saying if something that it is not findable when we go through a critical analysis of ultimately there's no such can be findable in the form and so forth. Yet at the same time, we're not rejecting the conventional existence of that form and cup. They do conventional existence, but ultimately, if we are trying to find ways, we will not be able to find.
哎呀，搞不马的死了个嘛，搞不一内陆的看这个，可以最看这个，我看这些呢，可得两个看这结构的是老远的高了，都被打上一点的两个结构嘛都，可能我们就两个结构那就就当头个也嘛，可能去看前面人这就差多了。
We're not rejecting the white cup itself. We're not rejecting the white is not a white. There is a white. The white exists. The way in which exists is, dependently existence. In other words, the way that white cup or that exists is mere imputed by one's concept and term. There's not even a slightest way of existence by its own side.
엄마랑 집에도 시에 비거라 주 코로나는 주바지에 거래 파샤바 인소지 거래서
Whereas Mathemaka Svatantika would say that when it talks about the existence of the form, it is not mere imputed by term and concept. It says it is imputed by it is combination of two. In other words, they said that's the slightest way of existence by its own side and imputed by one's own concept and term. So there are a combination of two, which is accepted by Madhyamaka Swatantika.
아예 엄마랑 집이 땡겨서 관련나 쉬우로 아니 되니 안에서는 되니 전에 또몇 다지고 엄마 타지가게 이 땡의 주바 짜이 세모사지에서 땡의 태그 말했으라고 그러지 그러와
This is what is difference between the Madhyamaka Prasanjika's way of accepting actual existence of things and event and Madhyamaka Swatantikas. The Madhyamaka Prasanjikas, there's no such notion or there's no such as even a slightest way of existence by its own side, the object's its own side. There's no such intrinsic, not even a slightest intrinsic character or attributes exists in any objects. Whereas the Madhyamaka Swatantika, they accept the combination of both dependent as well as the existence by its own side.
아야 다 파비냐자 이제다 내로 무슨 제게 로도스게 내로 제비 로다 이 내로니 보텔 치자 치자치지레마도 그 이게야 말고 타지도 동나리 동상래다
이제 손나
배나가 저 냐자게 단데 가서 맞추버데 냐자 코너로 고거를 쓰기 냐게 진도아 단다 로마 주버 탄저 로마 주버 시바 생인데 냐자 코너를 텔레젠버 여마르세데 냐자테 아니 유다 비기 주 동반이 세데 동반이 통해 로 코너다 아니 동반이 니데 칠레 치자치지 마도 그 타지의 동사래다
So here now, it's just a noble being who perceives reality possesses such consciousness, and not else, and no one else. It says that non-mistaken consciousness does not reify what is unreal. That means it does not reify or take existence such things as form and sound, which cannot be the final reality. So here. When we talk about the noble beings, when they see things that sees everything that is seen or that is known by the noble beings, the way they see things are something that is completely, lack of intrinsic existence. For them, everything that appears to them as a lack of intrinsic existence, because they're seeing how things really are. There's no such consciousness possessed by those noble beings, something that appears to them as intrinsic existence, something that appears to them as if they exist by in and of itself.
되게 냐자 되니라야 long 디콜라 다 주수 이쳐나 같이 지내서나 니 대도 점아 따버 생기 니 노아텔레 니 칼레칼레야 견조라바데 상주게 센터는 뭐도체 양 되게 타 되니라야 가서 배는 싹 주당한가기 리바트를 해고라 양냐자 양제토 양냐자 제토 니 가제 또비토는 산제 살아마도버도 냐제 처는 거
So this is how things appears to them as a non-intrinsic existence when they're in the meditative equipoise or when they're in the post-meditational period. When they come out of the meditative equipoise, everything that appears to them as an illusion-like and as a mirage-like, as a dream-like. And so they are not, it is not that when they're in the meditative equipoise, they are completely observing emptiness, which is non-inherent existence of all things in event. And then when they come out of that meditation period, in the post-meditation period, everything that appears to them due to their familiarization of the non-inherent existence during the meditative ego boys, when they come out of the meditation period, when they're in a post-meditation period, everything that appears to them as something that appears to them as the illusion-like or the mirage-like.
야, 다 두니야 레비 콜라 페나 수체 단다 페나 가소기 리텐도 텐도 지게 줄라 아니 토니 모소도 로라 질레 제비 콜라 아니 온셰 타제 사메 시 원도 enjo tene yane enjo nga chona ge ge chi nima sathong gi lekal le tanjo ina nga shungo matsi dai ya phala ya de ko lo ro tangos te shinju che ko ro ta pena toni ngo su to lo ran ji che bi pha ba de ta da mi de jen de la ke si ye be on de ton na ane on she ta je sa me ye shi ngo je sa de ta chi de nya ja yi ngo le de de nge de chi ma to jin ye ma ro e me bi ko la ta na nga so ye zambelin de no lo la ta da me ye 你们了，没了，怕真的话，见的他给那给对那刚才那个见那小区新的接有了，那但是等这个我的这边去偏去有的接推就嘛了吧。推就嘛的时候，我这现在的等的有了，等的大上这个明星嘛都通过的美国车个嘛的啥见的上面我了都多的事情，你现在有些的。他等着了，那这个明星嘛是某一点就等着说呢，好了这个过了，你可让信息，你可以点击就是等着有了。 이도 강제 강제 따지 제거래. 하나 런질에 집에 가라 변나 단답이 된전지게 아니 돈이 무슨도 별로 집에 가라 어시 건가 사미 예시 원도 사디 아니 대녀자이 가라 같이 쇼거래. 단데 여러 배서서나 좋아 침보러 갔다.
So now it says, when one enters into the path of seeing, when advancing from one spiritual path to another spiritual path, due to that advancement, such as accumulations in part of preparation and so on. Once one is able to cross, once able to, perfect all those stages of the path, when then one enters into the first bhumi, which is the path of seeing. When one enters into the path of seeing, all our visual consciousness are said to be, transforming into the uncontaminated wisdom. Uncontaminated wisdom. In other words, it's called become a wisdom. So therefore, everything that appears to that noble, the individual who become a noble, the noble that can be retained only when individual is entered in other words, the path of seeing onwards can retain the name what we call noble individual or the Arya beings. And such individuals, all this consciousness, including the visual consciousness and so on, will transform into an uncontaminated wisdom, which means everything that appears to their consciousness will be a lack of intrinsic existence. It appears a lack of intrinsic existence.
나 근데 나가서 사소니 뭐 파파 토메셔 세거라. 파파 토메 미 대절라 베베데 겐데 게투던데 게 페체마 메만 제네 슈네게 던데 페체 인지로. 다 계속 던데 지임에 온도 떠나가 저기 세데 근데 시대 사메 시진 온로 사비거라. 근데 시 샤찬 대시 풍보대 이제 그 대기에나 미시 있는 것도 풍부 도와래서 지 도와 말은 도와래서 근데 계제 근데 얘나 다 간제 있는 까지 간제 던지지만도 베제 ñerang kāi nāre tāngche lōla ñerang rācā mātāsa tōnyi ngōsu tō pāpā yōdhāru mēgi. Tēnchē kī tōnyi ngōsu tō pāngā rācī lā jē tsādi mēgi tēnchē kī tāmē pā kī sōsū chōwa tā kēnyā rēwān jēmē chā rōyī chē na yāng kōrōng lā jī lē tāpē ngōyī mā tō mēnchē ngē kī yōngi pā lēnsēn rōgā jī gāngā pā rōgā jī yēnā mē nā sā rōgā.
So that's just my own observation and my own opinion. Because when one enters into one as a human, let's take an example as the oneself as a human beings who have gone through all those meditative stages of meditations and advancing from one spiritual path to another and enters into the path of seeing, and all their consciousness including the visual consciousness, sensory consciousness, are transforming into uncontaminated wisdom, right? Uncontaminated wisdom. And then the individual who possesses this uncontaminated wisdom, everything their consciousness, all the consciousness possessed by that individuals are becoming uncontaminated wisdom. Then I'm wondering how that individual, him or herself, who is being a human being, whose body is still, composed of, blood, bones, and so forth, and how can the individual whose body is still contaminated and someone who can have this uncontaminated wisdom, that is, something that I'm having a debate in my mind.
당가서 가라 하고 그러잖아 내려와 그제 저도 예선 영어도 전화 줘 봐서는 예선이 제하면 시험 그래 근데 방아 터서는 제가 나지기 동에 bomba 시험 그래 옛날에 가서 하제 저점 봐서데 하밀레니 용비 폼비게니 폼보대니 가봐도 그거서는 하제 저점 봐서 이 저점 맞아 봐도 아니 가서 가르 세네스바니 세더 막 그래 저도다데 이제 연습내고 말이 폼보 레기 폼보대 아니 도바 다가랑이 하면 저점 차걸 쓰고 왔다 가서 그지 뭐 다저 다라고야나 다 같이 가서 파파이니 연주지 콜레지 알레면에다 사진요 녀리 풍부된 되게다 동조래 그 판라타네 제가 나치 동에 차도 빵바래다 얘나야 파미기 풍부대 아니 다른 가서 뭐게 코로나 다점바 옛날에 파파 코로나기 류데 사미지 풍부 얘나야 가서 수수조 레동보게 게데 게투 나서게 나게 근데 파서 저와체 통에 연애 면에서 되게 잘해마도 코로나기 다시 라이세라 그도 또비 라지레 제병어게 지 사체 풍부대 사미지 와서 때도 세버세 자차로라
So, such, beings once they entered into the path of seeing, from that onwards, even that individual who enters into the path of seeing, transcend from this world, and such individual will not remain under the influence of delusion and karma, and such individual will not take a rebirth, which is, forced by karma and delusions. They can have their, choose their way of taking rebirth in such a way, in a more effective or the beneficial for other beings and so forth. So when once they have left this body and this body that they have from ordinary person and gain this path of seeing and enters into the path of seeing, when they pass away from this life, then definitely their entire body, even though they may have taken a rebirth, their entire body can be uncontaminated.
나야 그래서 도바세그라 당가서 되시 그 상사지 매체가 생긴다 되더라 배제 하바던 가족이 배 장롱이 상하게 년에 전에 장롱을 당이게 니네 신의 차이 로크로는 지고기 내가 제통이 되니나야 뭐네 제나 원신용수 조바데 매고차네 생용수 조바데 아니 사건제 조랭이 또 뭐네 맞잖아요 자 엄마다 그제 자 니칼은 디비컬라 실로를 내가 지에 매쟁이 차거라 전적이 내가 차비까라 단단 가족이 지 파쇼를 내가 제가 지 통과 사도 통과를 세게 그니 이제 템비 단다 타니세게 도도로 다 도도로다 다 전적이 도도고지 이나 가서 도바 가르세워잖아 다 상추 선박이 땡제지 인친제라 다 상마 관계 년에 정이 인친제라 아니 걔한테 개투니게 배치 매이 땡쟁이 저한테 치료고 야나면은 세게 티켓 되게 도고는 거로
So when someone who has gained such a, uncontaminated body, which is in other words the wisdom body, or to someone who has gained this uncontaminated wisdom, and then particularly if it is according to the tantric practices, there's someone who has gain high levels of realizations and to be able to, withdraw all the energy winds and so forth into the central channels. It is said that there will no other contaminated contact. This will not contact with any other contaminated objects, things, and so forth. And if this is the case, then how can the bodhisattvas who are in such a high was in a state of such a highly realized stage, and how can they have contact with other beings, other ordinary beings? Their being as uncontaminated and ordinary beings are contaminated. How can they have a direct, uh, contact with those beings as a remaining as a teacher and student, as a disciples and teacher? How can it be? How can it happen? So this is my own, doubt that is having in my mind.
아, 야, 하트스 제단은 더 받지. 그래서 내 상사사 동문이 발레데 리 자차 동차 등이 주인의 선지기 대체 도구세 대한 상사 소소의 규모만 비엔데는 소에 제라. 그래서 제대한 제대지 상황사지만 저번에 지인의 미시만도 다 저기 매이 데르 데르지라 아니 걔한테 대슈데레 메 가자 이 지시바 찍고 마다 내가 제거요 말에 온시탄진 가요세로 제다바이쇼 시로바다 자가게데 자농강에 뜻어 농농의 뒤치체라 시시바 이래가 제거 말어 드르컬야 드르기야 로지도나 세버스키메도아.
So then it also says that ones who have the bodhisattvas who have gained the high levels of bhumi are said to be able to manifest their body and emanate their bodies of countless. They can an emanation. They can have a countless emanation of their body for the wealth of other sentient beings, and those are for the wealth of other sentient beings. And this is something very inconceivable, inconceivable in a secrecy of the practice, or for us it is something that is very inconceivable, in other words, because it is said that once you have gained such a high levels of bhumi, and then it says only the mental consciousness will become a functioning. It's what is being functioned is only the mental consciousness. All those visual consciousness, such as sense consciousness, is all absorbed into the mental consciousness. If this is the case, then for we as ordinary beings, it is something that is unbelievable for us. And how can they have a contact with other sentient beings? How can they work for the welfare of other sentient beings?
아, 야, 다 자롱이 로동의 시비기 로동. 아니 라방가의 참모기 레가체도 세대서 배 가서 카보세 그라 카본지 단단한 중에 지 영화기 마주에 손이 지로 안녕용이 손은 근데
There's
이 차송이 장로 차도 나오는 데는 쇼도에 단단데데 지려서 배는 게 단단 갈라워서는 맞아 냐자지 걸라니 마주비 시바차디 칠레 치자 세제 디코 다와 가세 되게 있는 데 지게 냐자데 냐자텔라 람비 걸라요 라파 것도 전에요 맞게 하면 받는 레바 제와나 기 제토그레 토그 말했어 계속 되시고
the reason why I'm saying this is because we don't have ourselves right now. We have no experiential knowledge of those, and it's hard for us to, imagine, because once one has gained the high levels of realization, especially to be able to withdraw all those energy channels into the central channels, and dissolving all those gross level of consciousness or conceptions, and remaining only the subtle level of consciousness, which is only the subtle level of consciousness is something that is what we call is functioning. And one, it is hard for us to imagine how just mere functioning this subtle level of consciousness can have a direct contact to other sentient beings in order for the welfare of other sentient beings. Maybe it is because in the you know, if you look at the text, you know, when the individual enters into the meditative equipoise in the emptiness, and such individuals' mind is completely observing mere emptiness. In other words, their mind is become a non-dual with emptiness object, emptiness itself. But when they come out of this emptiness, come out of that meditative equipoise in a post-meditation period, and then again it's just that other level of consciousness, the gross level of consciousness will manifest and have contact with other beings and to be able to work for the welfare of other sentient beings. But this
There
all we are not having this experiential knowledge ourselves, and it's hard to say.
전주로 당가서 거사 녀자 이던 그 삼 온시 당지 삼에 시진 온로 제토이 내거서 양 추송으로서 그 용수도 제거로 근데 제가 대변은 제당 가서 상제이나 이제로번 이제로번 전면다들 주세요더라 이 시기 로바 코로나에 아니 세상 손지 자니들의 가지 구성 도서 예 마치 벽고네 샤와 제통에 상제이 통문 제절래거로 대디 맞저기 변에 사동보와 저지 시베가라 온셰당지 사메 시원저 제털로 롬비가라 용수도 받냐 이 시기로 바코노라게 그것도 예미 레베 계세대 줘요. 근데 지나야 그 레다 코노 뒤에 세 통보기마도 타면박이 레베체도 말어.
So whereas Buddhas has their special qualities, it is said that once you have gained the complete state of enlightenment, you have attained what we call kutu sungjuk, which means the unity of the unity of body, speech, and mind. Wherever the body, the speech, and mind can be, it is inseparable. In other words, they are indivisible of body, speech, and mind. It's wherever the body is present, the mind is present. Where the mind is present, the body will be present, and so forth for the Buddhas, so they can have this special qualities when one is gained complete state of enlightenment. And where someone who is on the Bodhisattva's bhumi, such as someone who is in the first bhumi, or the first Bodhisattva's ground, when they're in the meditative equipoise, the entire consciousness, visual, sensory consciousness, all are dissolving into the mental consciousness and transforming into the wisdom. And when they come out of that meditative equipoise, are those, I have a doubt, but are this sensory consciousness will still, it will arose, it will, again manifest as a, sensory consciousness or the or the sense consciousness, or it still remains as the mental or the uncontaminated wisdom consciousness. We're not very sure how it is. And it's something that is inconceivable for us.
야, 따뜻한 가서 도파세너리 된 가서 책 읽이 말이야. 나도 때로와 변화 이게 또번 사통벌레 레비가라 이시기 가르쳐지 이시기 다 때다 때비 진고 연수 줘봐지 이시기로 바로 이시세나리 시 변화 저기로 봐세나리 그 통데 몰래바 때데 때세나리야 디제 시대시 디제지기 지비가라 때다 되기 지구에 저러마도 tempo po kono hiyo de kala ishi hiro pa ishi rang ro ishi rang ta de na yi ge ba chanzo jin ro tu wo ro ba ji ga so de da de bi jing wo yong su zo ba ji yi ji ro ba ge cha tong ye ji ga sa kong na cha bi kala ga sa de yi yen de la da nga zo che ja tu ma re da ki ko de yen ye di sha le dong bo a de si ge ni ko len jo kan de da tu re se de re da nge nge ga che shu xie.
So this is how, the Buddhas, when they manifest all those mandalas and supported and supporting mandalas are the play of their wisdom, what we call the play of their wisdom or manifestation of their wisdom. And that is understandable because this is only such can only happen when someone who has gained the state of enlightenment, and when such enlightened beings who is manifesting themselves, they manifest into the supported and supporting mandala and giving this giving empowerment and so on and so forth. It's only towards the suitable disciple who has ample accumulation of merits and virtues, not all beings. But when it comes to the bodhisattvas who are in the bodhisattva's bhume, are they will be able to do it or not? Is this something that can only be for the suitable beings, or are they be able to work for the welfare for entire sentient beings without exceptions?
Maya, that in the master logic. They are the main bars, drum window, but the conani, the turn the mirror. Mi shi ji zha xin zabi nongwa mami ba taro wachi. Gyun zo de jeba ne zu zha so zunbi teno was. Yoba mayi ba ne rangi tsenyi ji ma zhubi wo. Den dawa de ma zhubi sheba de ma sheba za. De kona ni ji yu jin de cha zang min zhu de da de ma zi bi shiro shibi teno. Dēng dēdā lāng gōngbō lū zhū jī zhōng kē xie jē gō bā nē, gē dē xie sō dēng dē ngō sōng lā sō bē, cē mā jē rāng kē cē nī jī zhū bē dēng gā yāng mā zhū bā sōng bā, dē khōng sōng zē bā yé nō. Gāng kē xie rē dēdā xie sō nē, ngā xie bē dēng dū bā yé lā. Gāng xie chū nī dō jū bē mī, Gyunzo ba kala yue jeba ne, gyunzo ji mila so ba chue jen de meba tenpa minji, nga sheba ta rangi tseni ji, zhubang unsu ma zhubbe, zhubbi zu chue jen do tanya tang ma zhubbi tuano, deyi shira she so ji tuane, rangi ngu zhubbi rangshin meba mawa tang, ngobo mawa nila zu ji jinchi chue jen de yabi, se ma chupi ngun sun tenang de ma chupi ni ki lu la tenang de chupi chue jen zhuxi chi tsema me be rangji da ji shugo la zhuba xia yu shu juen me ba xia de me che bi tenang ge de tanya de rangi ngun chupi rangji me bi shu de ta yin me jang ko jang de tanya de ta men de be Rangji ji chue jen la soba yu bi shir shu juan me yu do tana. Tanya do tenza yi rangjin yu ba me te pa ne nga yang xie jin da dong yang che be len teni ri ba ma yin nong ni pa pe ko ba ne. O te pa do lo xia xin ngan xia xia ka. Ya da ten chi bai.
So this means it is that it does not reify of the final reality. For example, it is like a fact that the visual consciousness of someone without eye disease does not seize the image of falling hairs. In that same sentence, the phrase "insofar as they are merely conventional" refers to the false object, like form and the sound. Non-existence means not existing by way of intrinsic characters. Such conventional objects are not established even in a part by non-mistaken consciousness, that is by consciousness that have final reality as their object. This is because non-mistaken consciousness do not see such conventional object, right? On this point, Chandrakirti cites a proof text by Nagarjuna, the protector. If sensory perception and so forth, this supporting citation states that four direct inferential or the spiritual and analogical valid cognitions, sensory perceptions, and so forth, do not at all establish an object that exists by way of its intrinsic characters. the sentence that beings, since inaccurate and accurate, summarize the point Chandrakirti has already explained. The sentence, so how could the conventional I as a subject of as the subject of a syllogism exists, is not claiming that the subjects such as conventional I are non-existent. Instead, as explained above, it means that a form that exists by way of intrinsic character or is established by non-mistaken perceptions cannot be subject of the syllogism, even conventionally. The meaning of therefore, since is that when both the opponents of the essential or intrinsic existence and the essentialist posits visual form as the subject of syllogism, non-mistaken perception does not establish as appearing in common to the both parties in the debates. Therefore, since there's no valid cognition attesting to a subject that is proven to appear in a common for both systems, there will inevitably be a false in any positions that you try to prove to the opponent using an autonomous reasons. Objections. What you say is true is regard to the position that has no essential or intrinsic nature, even conventional. However, since this is not what we who follow the Bhava Vivekas assert that conventional levels, the subject and such in autonomous syllogism do exist. Therefore, the position is free from fallacies. Reply: the existence of the such intrinsic nature is inadmissible conventionally, since we have already explained this above and will explain it again below your answer, again below. So your answer is unreasonable.
뭐 도대체 당어도 대자식 대자 아니
I'm here
뭐
with us today.
그 단단하니 되는 봐 대니 이제 다리 지도다 비슷한 사수 기회나 대니라 차라도 다셔로 질라 제가 이제 다 유지 캔체가 말이 되게 캔레면도 이 차도 다도 질라 아
뭐라 양산 치료돼 봐 도도아.
어디
So,
다리 지도다 지도에서 다리 지도된 히사 손이 그 차라데 되는 따로 지달라다
so we will have teachings next 2 weeks, 16 and 23, I think 23rd of the month.
어때니 당셔로지
Yeah.
야, 당가서 대리 추서지 이게 이제 당문에 세 토속이 세거라다. 또만 이제 따라. 오늘 될라 투사지 손의 시바 시보 적으로 써라. 당가서 시바 시보도 메제다. 근데 소소 다양 거는 가시 조심인 거는 또만 이제 따라 가면 되잖아요. 지다지 쳇 바차싱의 센지 바차자로라. 인자 되게 제발할 때는 소소만에 겨와서 뭐 중앙상에 지게 또네 rāngshī sāngchīng tāngchī kī jū lā, nē shāngchū sāng kī sīmbī tō nē, tō nī tō bī shī lā sōng chū jī tāwā rāngchī lā chē nē, nē rīmbō mā tō bā, nē tāngchī ngē mōngbō shē nē, tāngchī kī tōng bā nī jī tāwā tā rāngchī lā chē bā shō, nē yī chī rā bā rī bē dā rā rū sē kī, nē rāng kī sāng kī tō nē, nē tēn tā tēn bī chīng hū yōng sū tō bā chū nē rāngshī sāngchī tāngchī kī tēn chē tō ngē chī, rā, tēn chū jī yōng shō, nē, jē nī bā nē dē nā shū bē, nē tēn bā tū bē hō bā nē, ngē tsā yī nā mī bā jī ngā rā shī, nā rō chī sā nē.
So we have discussed on this profound teachings of emptiness for 2 hours. And as a result of our discussions and practice, one will be able to establish a positive imprints within one's continuum. So it is, therefore, let's dedicate all those merits towards attainment of one's enlightenment of oneself and that of other sentient beings. May all sentient beings be able to attain or achieve this wisdom realizing emptiness in conjunction with generation of bodhicharras. And as we spoke earlier, as the Buddhas who are able to manifest their wisdom, into the supported and supporting mandalas to working for the welfare of other sentient beings. May myself and all other sentient beings to be able to do this, to manifesting our wisdom into the supported and supporting mandalas to work for the other sentient beings. May all the Buddhas and the root gurus and lineage gurus please place me to be able to do this.
Dāgē chēnyē sābē gyāwā dē, dē nāng zhōwā kēnlā kāmbē, chēwā jēzē lō sāng chābā, dēbē nīmbō rē, zē jē shō sā jē, bē jē shō jē mē tō chāng, rē rā lē jē nyē dē chēmbā dē, sāng jē jē dō mē dē bē wāi, Dogen no da jin la zhe ba shu, qi wa gun do yang da na ma da, zhe mi zhi zhi be la long shi jin, sa da lang zhi yu de ra zo ne, do zhi chang ge go bo nian do shu, ye dang gu zhi zhen, 面对老高的杨大呀，面对那人多别人送你，看到杨宝刚西沙巴的，后面我的给弄着我，那真家也红包大酒鸡，的马顺便塞了更多。两边杨家在外结双呢，对别人把更长浪子。年年主编接那年写手，让给几年多变浪子。学着在外张月他给人，这月月就明白世间。教育等把有人在纠结，等把人间说给马脚。悄悄将把几杯说的呢，你这前辈也让就把。遍地地地是我是我用，世间教育没用真的。列住上去能接人别讲，当得能接一难别的。教育在把人都讲究起，能上主编听见主席。眼见世界没当门面根，赛道更多教育安排。那拉浪当着我们就接，刚才头把就那解决，最近着了嘴巴的叶子，都得能接大多出息，这些将是就跟教育节，就是那面各自老的。南瓜真的数据这报道，路上点别专门撒种，若叶明显大多研究起，刚着绕月过于星光，便当的往马林永远的，现在在往电子交错，小别身体报道研究起，小别报知大钱包。更多总部的样的钱的得到根据就是道路，给我得到堂姐老多我的送西边叫我堂姐，我刚老求多嘛把的大钱给人找我的给，总部谢谢老多我就，哎呀，对不起，给你们对不起。
So,